Welcome to Adjusted Reality, brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak with Colin O'Brady, 10-time world record-breaking explorer, about his new book, The 12-Hour Walk. Invest one day, conquer your mind, and unlock your best life. Colin O'Brady is an explorer, a speaker, entrepreneur, and an expert on mindset. His highly publicized expeditions have been followed by millions, and his work has been featured by the New York Times, The Tonight Show, The Joe Rogan Experience, and The Today Show. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Impossible First, and now The 12-Hour Walk. Invest one day, conquer your mind, and unlock your best life. I want to sincerely welcome you, Colin, to the Adjusted Reality Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, we want to dive in because there's a lot in this book and it's an exciting read. And in fact, I didn't put it down. When we dive into the details of this book, I want to start with you're an explorer. And I'd like to tell our listeners right now, you're the first person to cross Antarctica solo. Can you share some other journeys that you've accomplished that just come to mind as your top exploring adventures?
Yeah. I've been fortunate to explore pretty far and wide. In the book, I share many different anecdotes and stories from various different edges of the world, including, as you mentioned, becoming the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo. After that, I actually went back to Antarctica, but in a completely different way. Me and a team of people were the first people to row a boat across Drake Passage. So that's from the southern tip of South America to Antarctica, about 750 miles across what is widely considered the most dangerous ocean crossing in the world. So 40-foot swells, icebergs, and a tiny little rowboat with no sail, no motor, nothing like that. Pretty hectic. I set the world record for climbing the 50 tallest U.S. high points, so the tallest point in each of the 50 U.S. states. I did all 50 of those in 21 days. So just you can think about the logistics on that, not to mention the physical feats of it. World record, I've climbed Everest twice. I have the world record for speed record climbing the 7 summits, tallest mountain in each of the 7 continents, as well as something called the Explorers Grand Slam, North and South Pole, plus the 7 summits. So I've done a few things in the world of adventure, and it's really been from a place of curiosity to push my own body and mind, but also in this book is all about inspiring other people to capture and conquer their own Everest. It doesn't have to be a mountain, their own hopes, their own dreams, their own goals, unlock their best life, and really inspire people to get outside, move their bodies, and live active and healthy lives.
Oh, I love that you are trying to now inspire people, because let's be honest, it's not been easy the last 2 years. And I know even reading with what you had to go through and having all your plans ready to go, and then everything unfortunately starts to unravel quickly, and you have to be able to mitigate those unfortunate events. And in doing so, and being an explorer and someone who really wants to taste life, what actually brought you originally to the exploratory journeys that you've been on? Can you think of a time, did you plan this, or was this kind of, it just happened?
Yeah, it's been a long journey for me. As a kid, I always dreamed of climbing Mount Everest. So that was always kind of in my mind. I didn't have the financial resources or the climbing wherewithal or any of that to do it. But the dream was sort of fixed in my mind, from childhood. And so it's been iterative. I write about in the book, I've had some massive setbacks. A massive turning point for me was in 2008, not long after I graduated from college. I traveled around the world. I saved up a few pennies painting houses in the summer and decided to take a backpacking trip around the world. And so I it was an amazing experience, living on the cheap, being young out in the world, sleeping on floors and youth hostels and hitchhiking around, things like that. Amazing experience until I found myself, unfortunately, on a beach in rural Thailand where I made a stupid error. I jumped a flaming jump rope, and in an instant, my life really changed, and it lit my entire body on fire to my neck. I had to jump into the ocean to extinguish the flames, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned, particularly my legs and feet. And the worst part about it was that, I was in the middle of nowhere. There's no proper medical facilities. It was a moped ride down a dirt path to a one-room nursing station. And I underwent, 8 surgeries in a series of kind of rudimentary hospitals in rural Thailand. And the physical pain, of course, was immense, but I imagine the emotional pain was the worst. I think the 3rd or 4th day, I can't remember exactly, but the doctor came in, he said, "Colin, I hate to tell you this, but you'll probably never walk again normally." And it was because looking at my legs, the ligaments and the tissue had been so badly burned, they didn't think I would ever regain sort of full mobility in my ankles and knees and legs, basically. And that was just devastating. I'd been a collegiate swimmer. I've been an athlete my entire life. I know there's a bunch of chiropractors listening on here. Chiropractic has been a huge part, ever since I was young. My parents took me, to a chiropractor. It's kind of almost like my general doctor. I went to the chiropractor more than just a general practitioner. And my stepmom is a naturopathic doctor. So naturopathic medicine and chiropractic has been a huge part of my journey in staying healthy as an athlete. But this was just devastating beyond belief. It was just kind of like, hey, your body as you know it is no longer going to be the way it ever is. And fortunately, there's a heroine to this story, which is my incredible mother. She kind of came into my hospital room in Thailand, found me over there. And I know now she was kind of crying and pleading with the doctors for any semblance of good news, but she never really showed me her own fear. Instead, she came into my hospital room every single day, daring me to dream about the future, saying, "Hey, this is a bad situation, but what do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. Let's look towards a bright future." I now call this, and I talk about this in the 12-Hour Walk the book, this concept this term I've kind of coined it, I call the possible mindset. We can either be full of limiting beliefs and all the things that we can't do or weren't going to work or going to be impossible, or a possible mindset, is an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. And my mom, even in the worst case scenario for me at the time, was daring me to dream about the future. And so I closed my eyes one day and kind of visualized a brighter future. And I said, this might sound crazy, but I pictured myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon. And she could have easily said, I said set a goal, but I mean, look at the legs. It doesn't look like it's going to go so well. Maybe pick a different goal. But she said, you know what? Great. With that possible mindset, she says, I can't see why not. In fact, doctor, my son's training for a triathlon. Can you bring him in some weight? So I have this photo of me with my waist bandaged down, my legs and feet completely bandaged. I haven't taken a step. When I got released from the hospital, I was in a wheelchair. I mean, I was in pretty bad shape, but I'm, lifting 10-pound dumbbells in this Thai hospital, telling the doctor, one day I'm going to train and race for a triathlon. So fast forward, I got back. I finally flew back to Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. Was in a wheelchair, like I said, carried on and off the planes, and then my mom and a series of, amazing, doctors, physical therapists did get me back on my feet, moving my body again, slowly at first, trying to regain that mobility that they thought I wouldn't regain, and eventually moved to Chicago, took a job, and I signed up for a Chicago triathlon, kind of honoring that goal. And 18 months after being burned in this fire, and told I would never walk again normally, I raced a Chicago triathlon, and I finished the race. And to my complete and utter surprise, I hadn't just finished the race, but I actually won, placing first out of nearly 5,000 participants on the day. Very long-winded answer to your question about sort of what got me into that. But it's really this moment in time that was a massive turning point for me. I'd always had this curiosity for exploration. Like I said, I dreamed of climbing Everest. But from this most devastating injury, my mom, I feel like, opened a doorway for me to these limitless possibilities. And in that moment, I didn't think to myself, wow, I'm some superhuman athlete. I'm so great. It was like, wow, as humans, not just me, anyone listening, any person walking this planet, all of us, we have these reservoirs of untapped potential to achieve extraordinary things. And it's an amazing moment in time, because from one of the darkest moments of my life, my mom taught me this incredible lesson, which is about mindset, which is about the ability, even when facing huge adversity, that shift in mindset and belief can be huge. Not to mention, of course, all the, medical and people helping me and supporting me along the way. But I don't think I would have been able to get there without that shift in mindset, without that goal sort of anchoring me. And so from that standpoint onward, it's sort of a long journey. I'll shut up. But, it got me thinking about, what am I more capable of? What can I continue to do? How can I continue to push my body, which has taken me from, this hospital bed to the triathlon, to quitting my day job, become a professional triathlete and racing professionally for about 6 or 7 years, to then now sitting here with 10 world records in the world of exploration. It's kind of been all iterative, but iterative based on this kind of terrible moment, but ultimately the positivity of this recovery and growth and mindset from that moment forward.
It is. It's growth and mindset that really does set us apart when we look to those that are really tasting and achieving life and those that are failing and really struggling. It's the ability to thrive with the mindset and the body balance. And I want to go in because I before I go too deep into the mindset, and I love that you really engage the term possible mindset. And it is really an opportunity for those that are listening right now to dive deep, knowing that your body may not be in the best shape, but you can shape your mind right now, right with us today. And let's talk about the physical journey before we jump into the mindset, because your book really is about the mindset. When you did, let's just take Antarctica as one. Not only was this a first time ever achievement for any human on Earth, throw in the mix that it became a competition. And I know you're very humble, and I absolutely adore the type of person that you are by reading the book and seeing that you are 100% authentic to yourself. And it really does come with the people that you've surrounded yourself with. Fortunately, you had a mother that had this zenful way of looking at life, and that was a blessing. And you encourage that through some of the things that you have done, even when there was a bunch of naysayers around. But I want to go back to Antarctica, and it was cold, and you have been known to be in cold, and you have survived some very extraordinary cold weather. When your body is pushing the limits, the boundaries, and you've tried to set your mind in that spot, I want to ask you, how do you deal with the physical pain? Because I would imagine every single day, especially when you got dropped off and you know what, this sled's not moving. The pain, the physical pain was there every day with you. And it's for those that have trained for a triathlon, like I have as well. It every day is a little bit of a wake out of bed and get the whole body moving, kind of that really soreness. But this is on an exponential level. Did you feel physically worn every day?
Yeah. So the Antarctic crossing, the solo Antarctic crossing, was interesting. One, in training for it, there was no blueprint. No one had ever successfully completed this crossing. And what I was attempting to do is be the first person in history to cross solo, so completely alone, unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel. So what that ultimately, the math on that is I was basically dragging a 375-pound sled behind me to put as much food as I possibly could put in my sled. Obviously, it would get a little bit lighter every single day, but even that wasn't enough food. So I actually was burning about 10,000 calories per day, surviving in these minus 40-degree temperatures pulling the sled, but I only had enough food to keep me going for 7,000 a day. So literally on day one, I'm already on a 3,000 calorie deficit, which is brutal. And then in addition to that, I was doing something called human powered or unaided, which means no kites or dogs. People have crossed Antarctica, using kites to propel them further distances, but no one had ever done it just sort of mono, what's called man hauling, human powered. And as you mentioned, I thought that I was racing history. Now, people had attempted this crossing. Unfortunately, a guy passed away a couple of years before I attempted it. He was only 100 miles from the finish after 71 days, and he fell ill towards the very end and ultimately died. Another very prominent explorer, the year before I attempted it, and after 50-some days, he had to be evacuated because he had ran out of food and fuel, and he wasn't going to make it. And people were like, this is impossible. Like the math equation of not having enough food and how far you have to go and how heavy the sled would have to, if you have 1,000-pound sled, sled, you're not gonna be able to move it at all, right? So it's not like you can just bring infinite supplies because you just be sitting at the start line, not moving. So it's an interesting conundrum. But then, as you mentioned, as I'm basically getting ready to depart, I find out there's another guy attempting this crossing at the very same time. And, meet Captain Lou Rudd, this badass British explorer. He's like the British Special Forces equivalent of like a British Navy SEAL, basically, also very accomplished in the polar region previous to this. When I say the same time, literally we end up shoulder to shoulder in the same cargo plane because there's like one guy with one plane that can take you to the edge of the frozen continent to begin this crossing because there's only one season where you can do this. And so it's not like, oh, there's another guy somewhere might be trying this in the next couple months. Like literally shoulder to shoulder, looking this guy in the eye, like we're about to start this thing on the exact same day. And it ends up being, a 1,000-mile race across the entire frozen continent, not just history, but now head to head. And full disclosure, he kicked my butt right out of the gate. Like I could barely pull my sled and he was more prepared than me. And he just took off and disappeared across the horizon. And I was like, oh, wow, this thing is over in the first few hours. So much so that I actually started crying on the first day. And I didn't realize this. I know this now, but when you start crying and it's -30, -40 degrees outside, well, the tears, they freeze to your face, which is like the all-time most pathetic feeling on the planet. So I had some pretty low moments, but your question was about the physical. The physical was intense. I thought I had trained my body as best I could to prepare for this. I actually even gained a lot of muscle, but also gained a lot of weight and fat, just thinking I'm going to lose so much weight, like starving myself as strong as I could. I had this incredible coach, this guy named Mike McAllister, who himself has several world records. This guy's done, get this, 5,804 pull-ups in 21 hours. Carrying a 30-pound weight. I can do like 7 pull-ups. So I'm like, but him and I have different, but he is, here's the guy to help me figure out how to train my body. Incredible guy. But I'm harnessed into a sled. So imagine I'm dragging this sled, but imagine like a backpack with like a rope on the back of it that's connected to this sled pulling. For all the chiropractors listening, you can imagine how pretty quickly like that would load I had a little bit of a waist belt. So it's like my waist, my hips, my shoulders, putting 375 pounds of weight and torque. And it's slightly uphill for the first 500 miles. It's like 1 or 2% grade uphill. And there's all these, there's crevasses, but there's also these big mounds of ice and snow called sastrugi. So it's like up and down and around. And I fell on the ground hundreds of times and jostled around. My body was in excruciating pain. And one thing I probably should have thought about it, but I didn't consider for the chiropractors out there. I wish I had one of you with me in my sled. It might have been extra weight, but it would have been worth it because you could have fixed me, which was Antarctica and a whiteout. So Antarctica is 24 hours of daylight during the Antarctic summer, even though it's still -30, -40. In the Antarctic winter, it's like -100 because it's 24 hours of darkness. So I'm there when it's 24 hours of daylight, still extremely cold. That's with no wind chill. Usually 30, 40, 50 mile per hour winds are common. I might be -70-degree wind chill. I mean, it's brutal. And I basically, when a whiteout comes in, you can't see anything. It's just white on white on white. It's so disorienting. I mean, if you didn't have a compass, you would walk in a circle like over and over and over again. So the only way to navigate is I have a compass that's strapped to my chest. And hence the name of the 12-hour walk, which we'll get back to the book, which is ultimately a call to action for everyone listening to take their own 12-hour walk to tap into their own body, their own minds, to unlock their own best life. But I was walking roughly 12 hours per day in Antarctica. And I had this compass strapped to my chest and these whiteouts. And so my neck would be creamed down just staring directly at a compass needle because every few seconds, imagine closing your eyes and walking down a dark hallway. Like you're going to smack into the wall. As humans, without visual cues, like we can pretty much are incapable of walking in a straight line. It's a weird thing that we take for granted. And so I remember the first day in a whiteout, I have my neck craned down staring at this compass that's strapped down to my chest. I think nothing of it other than this is incredibly boring. And I'm staring at a compass 12 hours a day, pulling a sled. I get into my tent that night, set up my tent, get inside, and I wake up in the morning and I can't even move my neck. Like it's like stuck in the downward position because I've been putting all this weight against my neck and back and also craning my neck like down in a 90-degree angle. It was so painful. But I couldn't do anything else. I had to look at the compass the next day and the next day and the next day after that. So I tried try to heat up a water bottle and rub my own neck and crack my own. I mean, I was in bad shape. And this is like day 3, day 4. I mean, there's 54 days of this. So you can only imagine a lot of pain that my body went through. Although I will say it's interesting. Sometimes you get in so much pain, you think, God, I can never take any more of that. It's only going to get worse. And then somehow the next day, the body sort of releases something or kind of, it gets stronger or makes some adjustment naturally. So my body did get through it. But I had a lot of neck and back and aches and pains that I wish if I had a massage therapist or chiropractor there to help me out, it would have made a big difference for sure.
It's so nice that you say that because we're currently in an opioid epidemic across the country. And one of those moments that is really critical is for them to hear that you think you can't go one more day. And I love that you pushed the moment to say, I can go one more day. I can do the next moment. And the body does have this miraculous moment where it starts to heal itself. And that's the innate intelligence that we're built with. And it's incredibly important that while you're on this journey, that your body started to listen to your mind. Now let's go back to the mind-body journey. How did mindset play a role in many of those journeys? And I know you talked about, and many physicians will always ask you when you come in and you have pain and say, can you rate that pain on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 is like the worst you've ever, you might as well just say, I'm about to die. And 1 is like, yeah, it's there, but it's not too bad. I can deal with it. You talked in the book about the mindset, and I really enjoyed reading how you looked at the 1s and how you looked at the 10s. Can you discuss that with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit of context for people who are unfamiliar with the book yet. The book's called The 12-Hour Walk, and it's really framed. It's rich, edge of your seat storytelling. It's not an academic textbook, but it brings in adventure stories from my life, like we said, crossing Antarctica, rowing a boat across Drake Passage, as well as all sorts of other sort of normal, quote unquote, more normal moments of my life, of moments where I've had success, lots of moments, a lot of vulnerability, and sharing moments where I failed and failed repeatedly. Because what I really find is that, whatever's standing in the way of people's achievement, their best life, whatever they want to, the life that they want, is ultimately this mindset, what we commonly call limiting beliefs. Like there's these series of limiting beliefs. You ask somebody like, well, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you happier? Why aren't you feeling more fulfilled? Like, oh, well, I would be, but I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I'm not strong enough. I'm afraid to fail. But if I do that, someone's going to criticize me. I hate being uncomfortable. These are common limiting beliefs. And each chapter in the book breaks down one of the 10 most common limiting beliefs, including all those I just listed off. Through storytelling and some prescriptive advice that I share with you. But at its core, the book is a call to action. And the call to action is for you to, in our busy world where we're bombarded by all sorts of, external stimulus, music, social media, podcasts. I love podcasts, but there's a time and a place to shut that down as well. I ask people to say, take a 12-hour walk. What that means is step outside your front door, put your phone on airplane mode, and go for a 12-hour walk. Now, I don't care if you go for 1 mile or 50 miles. It doesn't matter. You don't have to train for this. My 77-year-old mother-in-law, her 12-hour walk looked like her walking 1 lap around her block and then sitting on her front porch while she rested for an hour, but still in stillness and silence, wasn't listening to music. No one else was there. Then she walked another lap around their block, but she spent a day alone in her mind, in her thoughts, which is really what this is ultimately about. And so you asked about the 1s and 10s, and it's something that I has been really powerful the way I've framed this in my own mind. I share it in the book. And I think it's an important kind of framework to reference in this concept, which is, you might be thinking right now, I just told you, like, take a walk by yourself in silence. You're like, that sounds terrible. Like, that sounds so boring. Or like, man, my feet are going to be so tired at the end of this. So I would rather, I don't want to do that. And one of those main limiting beliefs, one of the ones I started the book on, is I don't like to be uncomfortable. Which is common, right? Like, we're like, well, why would I seek discomfort? Right. And I've come to think about life sort of on the spectrum of 1 to 10, or experiences in life on a spectrum of 1 to 10. 1 being our lowest moments. That burn accident in Thailand, that's clearly like a 1, right? Or some other, doesn't have to be physical, emotional devastation. Dealing with loss of a close friend or a family member. I mean, we know what 1s are. You don't really want to have the 1s, right? But then the 10s are the high highs, right? It's like these incredible moments of your life. Maybe it's falling in love, or it's standing on a mountaintop that you really wanted to climb, or it's the day your first child was born, or it's like these peak high highs. And everyone's like, "Oh, I want the 10s. I want as many 10s as I possibly can have." Of course, who wouldn't want that? And when I realized, crossing Antarctica solo and other things I've done, when I finally did, spoiler alert, I did make it across. I was the first person in history to make that accomplishment. And, there was this post on the other side of the continent where they kind of marks the edge of the continent before the ice shelves start. I get to this post and I touch it and I'm like, wow, I'm still there alone. And this is a 10 moment for me. And I get my satellite phone home and I call home to it happens to be day after Christmas. I call home to my family. My wife's there. My wife is so incredible. I mentioned my mom, but my wife is this amazing person who's dreamed all these things up with me and has, my co-creator, co-conspirator. We've been together for 15 years. So fortunate to have, in our relatively young lives, lived an amazing chapter of our life together over the past 15 years. That's a 10. Like that moment is a 10. But as I got there, I also realized I'm experiencing this 10, not in spite of the ones. Crossing Antarctica alone, walking through that wind chill, that cold, the frozen tears, all the things like the starvation, there was a lot of ones in that experience. And I realized the 10 I was experiencing on the other side of that wasn't in spite of the ones, but actually because of the ones. Because I allowed myself that discomfort, because I got outside of my comfort zone, I was actually able to experience this 10. And now I thought about, and I framed that around this 1 to 10 scale that I was talking about before, is that I think too often people in our modern society live life in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency. This zone between 4 and 6, right? It's just like, I think a lot of people in the profession of chiropractic are actually following their heart and their passion, which is amazing. All the chiropractors I know have done this from a place of really deep caring about this healing. But I think we all also know a lot of people in the world who are kind of let's say they're doing a job and it's just like, it's fine. Like, like it pays the bills. It's fine. I'm not like fired up about it. It's like, it's a 5, like it's a 5, but you spend a lot of your time doing it. It's like, yeah, I do this 5 job every single day, like whatever. Or like you're in a relationship and maybe you've been dating somebody for a few years or maybe longer, maybe shorter, it doesn't really matter. But, you're cohabitating, it's not like toxic, it's not abusive or anything like that, but it's just kind of like, yeah, like we're just existing, Those are just 2 random examples, right? There's a million others, but we know that feeling of just being in that comfort zone, in that zone of comfortable complacency. But what happens there is people think this is better than being a little bit uncomfortable, better than ripping off the Band-Aid of the uncertainty of this relationship and being, alone or single in the world for a second, or trying to apply for other jobs because that process is kind of annoying. But what I've come to realize is that if you want the 10s, if you want that deep fulfillment, you have to be willing to experience the 1s or the 2s. I mean, it's a silly analogy, but imagine you want to remodel the kitchen of your house. You're like, I want the, sparkling new appliances and the new floor and the cool tile backsplash or whatever that is. Like, what's the first thing you're going to do in your kitchen remodel? You're going to rip out your appliances. Your stove's not going to work. Like the plumbing's going to be shut off for a week. It's going to suck kind of because like your house is torn apart. Which meaning like, maybe I don't know if that counts as a 2 or a 3 or whatever that is, but the point is it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think, for me, it's not like some masochistic thing, like make yourself in pain all the time or something like that. But it's just to say, like, people ask me all the time, Colin, are you afraid of dying? I've been in all these high risk environments and I'd say, look, I'm not trying to die. I'm definitely very risk averse in the sense that I take as many safety precautions as I can in all these environments. That said, what I'm more afraid of is I'm afraid of not living. I'm afraid of not living. And I think a life, do you need to be in 4, 5, and 6 some of the time, or a lot of the time? Sure, to rest, recover, recoup, build 100%. I'm not saying live life and only in the 1s and 10s, but I am saying seek out experiences that push you outside of that comfort zone. So in concluding that thought, the 12-hour walk, this book, like I said, the book is an essential companion to the walk and is chock full of all sorts of interesting insights and wisdom. But at its core, you could listen to this podcast right now and do the essential thing, which is actually the walk. Costs nothing other than to say, I'm putting a date on my calendar. You can sign up on my website. It's completely free, 12hourwalk.com, just if you want to get some extra inspirational from me. But basically, you could literally do it without doing that even as well. It is you taking this time. Why? Well, in this instance, in terms of what we're talking about, the 1s and 10s, you might get tired out there. It might be hot. It might be cold wherever you happen to be walking. It's going to be different. Imagine how many days of this past year you can't even remember what you did. Like you will remember this experience. And what will happen implicitly is there might be, I don't know if there'll be a 1, but there might be some 2s and 3s. Like, why did I decide to do this? Or I'm alone in my thoughts or my feet are tired or whatever. but you get back to your front door and you've pushed through that discomfort. I have known hundreds of people, now there's thousands of people that have done the 12-hour walk, and every single one says, when I got back to my front door, I felt so fulfilled. I felt so proud of myself. I felt stronger than I've ever felt. Yeah, I was doubting this in hour 7, hour 8, meaning experiencing some of those low moments, but the effect is the ultimate completion. Those hours went by, and now I feel so deeply fulfilled and so proud of myself for what I've done. And that's why the 12-hour walk is not just a book, but it's an experience. It's a global movement. My biggest goal with this is to inspire 10 million people to take this 12-hour walk, because I've seen the life-changing journey in just one day of what people can explore in their own minds, and ultimately that possible mindset that they can conjure.
I so agree with you. It's important to be able to take on some goals, even when it seems hopeless, even when it seems there's no tomorrow. I feel like I want to give up. And if there's a person out there listening that really just feels like giving up, this book gives you that one little extra step that Colin had to go through. That's realistic and it's authentic. This is not just a 10-time world-breaking, record-making individual hero. This is an authentic, real, raw moment that Colin shares with you. And I know you've met some billionaires in your life, and I would bet, having had that experience, that many of them sat back and thought, this kid is really on fire. Like you've lived almost 3 lives in one. Like a normal person would not have had the brushes with death that you've had, the lowest lows. I've, being Canadian, have had tears freeze to my face, and I know what frostbite feels like, and they can be pretty low moments. And this world has been at some extraordinary low moments, but you did persevere. And that's what we want people to hear, feel, and do, is get that mind active. Push yourself a little more, get invited into your thoughts. And I want to ask you, since you brought the love of your life up, I'm not going to give away the book entails, but you inspired your own wife. And as I read the book, I was thinking, what a hero she is, tactically and strategically, to be able to help you pull this off. And if there's one thing in life that you're going to realize quickly, is we don't go it alone. When the tough times come, there's someone out there that's going to be able to say, you know what? Let's pick our bootstraps up and let's get ourselves one more step. One more step. That next step can really make the difference to getting your momentum back. And let me ask you this, since it seems to me that you, in fact, probably inspired your wife to want to climb Everest, and all the obstacles were against this. This was the first time you were on an adventure where the most important person in your entire life was in your hands. You had to help this person. You had to think your future is right there. And it's got to be like a double down fear factor that not only am I responsible for my life to get to the summit of Everest, but this is the person that has gone everywhere with me and was very nervous about some of the ice caps in I think it was called the Black Pyramid. Is that correct?
That was on K2 on Everest. It's called the Khumbu Icefall. Yeah.
Thank you.
But you're remembering. I'm impressed. You're remembering some iconic places on high Himalayan peaks.
So if you could go into stepping outside yourself in your journeys in the past, because it was really, you had to focus on you and only you. Even though there was a team there, you knew that your team, you weren't going to live the future with that team, but this is the future. Jenna is your past, your present, and your future. So now, can you tell me, when you look at that moment on Everest, how did that feel to have that little added extra pressure, shall we say?
Yeah, it's a really great and a very insightful question. I've been fortunate to have this extraordinary relationship with my wife for so long. And as I said before, really in the weeds of all the dreaming of these big goals and these adventures. But she'd be the first one to tell you if she was sitting there, like she doesn't identify her core identity as athlete or adventurer or, explorer or any of these things. Like she's like very supportive of me doing them. And, certainly has an adventurous streak of her own, but it's just not her like main thing. And we've had this great balance and partnership in our relationship, both personally as well as professionally, kind of building businesses and doing various things together. But she did, set herself this goal of climbing Everest. And I won't give away all the totality of the full details of the book, but I do write about pieces of this in the book. But I thought what you asked me was so incredibly insightful from the point of view of, it's one thing to be alone in Antarctica by myself. And Jenna was my lifeline, meaning I would call her from my satellite phone for help. Or when I was on K2 and ultimately lost 5 friends in a series of bad accidents in Pakistan. Again, Jenna was at base camp at first, and then at home on a satellite phone when I was up on 24,000 feet on this crazy stormy night in Pakistan. I'm like trying to figure out, what to do. And, terrible things were unfolding. But I didn't quite realize how different it would. I know how much her support and love and care and empathy and how much trust I have in her decision making when I'm in these really compromised situations. I know how important that has been. What I didn't quite realize was what it would feel like to be fully in that environment with her, meaning energetically, I have felt like she is there. Like I've always joked with her. I said, people say I walked across Antarctica alone. What they don't realize is you just walked beside me the entire time, except for you didn't have to feel the cold on your face. And because we were just so emotionally connected with one another during that journey. And even though I had no one to talk to for 54 days, like I really felt like she was there with me, as a huge emotional uplift. There's no way I could have done it without her. But we do end up climbing Everest together. It was my second time up there. And so I knew somewhat to expect. And one story pops into mind for me, which was my first time I was climbing Everest in 2016. I was up there and 3 people died the day that I summited Everest. Not anyone who I was climbing with or knew, but there was a series of incidents where 3 people passed away. But before even any of that had happened, I was coming off the summit. So I'd summited, this high for me, childhood dream fulfilled. I'm coming back down the mountain. And above so Everest is 29,000 feet high, and above 26,000 feet, there's 14 mountains in the world that are above this altitude. And above that height is known as the death zone. And it's called that because there's been research that kind of proves out that even if you're using supplemental oxygen, and certainly if you're not without, the human body is slowly dying, meaning you can't survive for very long up above 26,000 feet. Basically you're on borrowed time. So when you're going to go for a summit push on Everest, it's like you just go up there for a very brief moment. You only stay on the summit for about 5 minutes and you're lucky to get back down. And I always heard that if you get in a bad situation on the summit of Everest, no one can kind of help you down. Meaning it doesn't matter if there was the strongest team of Nepalese Sherpas or you had your best friends and 5 of them, whatever, like they're not going to be able to carry you down off of this mountain. And I always heard that, but I always thought to myself, like, I'm fit, I'm strong, I'm this, like if something went wrong with somebody else, like I would do my best to help them. And I'm coming off the summit and I come across this woman who's laid out completely on the ground. Her oxygen mask has fallen off her face and she's got her head down against the snow. And I'm like, oh my God. And then I look at her and I realize I recognize her. It's a woman who I had become friends with in base camp, a Brazilian woman named Thais. And I'm like, Thais, what's wrong? Get up. And there's her climbing partner's there. He's saying, I think we have a problem with her mask. We're trying to figure it out. Her oxygen mask came off and she's collapsed. And I think to myself, this is the moment. This is the moment I've heard about. Like, this is not a, 250 pound, huge 6'5", like huge guy. Like this is a woman who's like smaller than me. Like I can help her. And so I lean down. My first instinct is like to help pick this woman up and think about how we're going to carry her down. And as I go down to pick her up, I realized that I can't move her an inch. I'm so exhausted. Like the effect of being in this death zone, like you are just hanging on for dear life yourself. And I realized it was the most helpless feeling in the world. And so since I quickly realized I can't move her, or help her back to her feet, and we're a long way from safety of camp, miles and miles, I just kind of whisper and then kind of yell into her ear. I'm like, Tice, you got to get up. If you can hear me, you got to get up. You got to get up. And fortunately, there's a good ending to the story, is we were able to clear the ice from her oxygen mask and get it back on her. And she kind of regained her footing once she got her oxygen mask on. And ultimately, believe it or not, went on to summit the mountain and get back down safely, which was incredible. But when I went back in 2021, 5 years later with my wife, this moment was ringing through my head the entire time, which is I had to say to Jenna, I said, look, I'm so proud of you that you've set this audacious goal. Being up on this summit, if we make it to the top, will be the pinnacle of all pinnacle life experience, a 10 of all 10s, just incredible. But as I'm the guy who walked across Antarctica dragging a 375-pound sled. My perception of me is like, you're fit, you're strong, you're, some people say, oh, you're superhuman, which I don't agree with. But, sometimes people throw those words around. And I'm like telling my wife, I'm like, got to know that when we get up there, I will be able to emotionally support you. I'm going to be right there with you every single step, not going to leave you alone, all the things. But if something happens, like if you were to break your leg or if you were to fall down or something like this, it's going to be nearly impossible, if not impossible, for me to rescue you. And I had gone through that scenario in my mind, kind of intellectualizing it. But I'll tell you what, being in that moment was one of probably the most vulnerable feeling that I have ever experienced in my entire life. And again, I might just leave it at that, which is, it was a high. Having that experience together, oh my God, there's a picture hanging on our wall that I know we'll show our grandkids one day of us up there, just an epic of all epic, amazing experience. And I write about it in depth in the crescendo of the 12-hour walk. So if you want to get more details on that, pick up the book. But to be up there, to know the stakes, to know the intensity, and again, it's like one thing where I've been in these places by myself, but to then be there kind of responsible or holding that space for the person that you love more than anything in the world was truly, like I said, a 10, but not without risking the 1, that's for sure.
That's how I thought about it when I was reading the book, is I was thinking about how vulnerable you opened the space for your wife to step into. You probably were a big part of why she wanted to do it. I mean, she has been part of every single breath you've taken in every one of these adventures, because just like I, that when you're helping someone achieve their goal, you're right there with them. You cannot not be there, because the most important part is you're linked, and she is enduring all of the tears frozen to the face in her mind. And there's a family mantra that you had that I thought really sums it up, is the worry was going to be there, but the don't bleed before you're cut will probably stick with me for a while too, especially as a parent, because you do worry. And I'm sure, if you're completely honest, there were moments of worry going up that Everest, because you and you can fight and you can drill down, but that's you. But to know that there's worry because you know what's ahead, and you also know that coming down can be even more dangerous than going up, that high is only as high for a few moments, because you can't stay there very long. You have to come down. And in so doing, it's the fatigue and it's the mental exhaustion and the cognitive ability to make the right step at the right time. And you're not going to make it without her.
That's 100% true. Any good mountaineer will tell you that the summit is only halfway. So as we did have our own little celebration on these summits and other pinnacle experiences, like, I'll really celebrate you when we're back in the hotel in Kathmandu. It's a long way from there. So, every step is harder, and both going up and going down. That's for sure.
Well, I'm very proud of both of you. And I think that family mantra will be something that I will hold close to my heart. But I do want to ask you one question, since it's almost a failure on my part, the 60,000 foot view being that you've been at the peaks of most of the mountains in the United States. But you talked about one thing, and I want to ask you if you could just share a little bit with our listeners about Vipassana meditation.
Yeah. So
I think it saved your life. I really do. So I really need to know when you learned it and what you got out of it.
Yeah, it's been completely game changer for me. So when I was racing triathlon professionally, not long after I won that first race. And then like I said, I quit my job and pursued triathlon full time to try to make the Olympics. I was at a race early on in my professional career. I was racing, and a buddy of mine, he came to the race and he brought his wife, who I didn't know super well. They're recently married. It's a Turkish woman, and she was only there because of him. And she watched the whole race and she saw the intensity of these, professional athletes swimming, biking, and running to the, highest standard or whatever. And after the race, she goes, I've never really been to a professional sporting event. I didn't really grow up around sports. Sports isn't like really my thing, but it was super cool to watch. And she just asked me really earnestly. She says, so what are you doing for your mental training? Just like a really normal question. And I'll be honest, I felt like I got caught with my pants down. Like I was like, I do like some visualizations. And she was like, wait a second, hold on. You must be swimming and biking and running every single day to train to do what I just watched you do. I'm like, yeah, constantly. And she's like, but you don't like do like a mindfulness practice or like a meditation or like some sort of like actual structured mental training. And I was just kind of like, I literally was like so embarrassed. I was like, not really. And I was like, well, what do you recommend? And she was like, well, I don't know if this applies to the sports, but she says, changed my life. She goes, I just got done with this 10-day silent meditation retreat. It's this meditation called Vipassana meditation. And I was like, tell me more about it. She goes, look, you go, it's completely free to go. It's 10 days, no reading, no writing, no eye contact. You meditate 12 hours a day, a couple simple meals, and you're alone. Basically, there's other people there, but you're not interacting with anybody. And I'm kind of a dive into the head. I was like, look, so I'm kind of a dive into the head first sort of person, in my life. So I was like, well, I haven't meditated a minute in my life, but I was like, sign me up. I'm signing up. I'm going. And, people in my family thought I was crazy because I'm a pretty extroverted person, always talking and whatnot. And I'm like, I'm going to go do this silent thing for 10 days. And I went, and I came back, and I remember going to my front door. This is years ago. So this is 2011, 11 years ago, I guess. Even before I said a word, Jenna was like, wow, like you've changed. Like she could just like sense it. And it gave me a deep level of awareness, a sense of myself and my body. And I go on to, and I'll bring it full circle a little bit to the 12-hour walk. One of the things that I say often is, people say, how did you walk across Antarctica alone? How did you do this? How did you do, all these kinds of like physical questions? You ask the same question, which is great. I love talking about the physical element, but I say the most important muscle any of us has is the 6 inches between our ears. And I use that word muscle very intentionally here because it's funny, obviously you see this as in the work that you guys do as chiropractors, et cetera. Like people will say, I'm training for this, or I want to get bigger biceps. And it's like really obvious. Like every person knows, if you want to get bigger biceps, like you go to the gym, you lift weights, you do bicep curls, you do bench press. Like we just know that. Even if you're not into weightlifting, it's like we just know that. But funny enough, and this woman Eche, my friend's wife, who was basically like saying to me, which I've learned over time now clearly, is she was like, well, what mental what mental bench press are you doing? Like, if you want to strengthen your mind, you need to take your mind to that mental gym. You actually need to have that activity. So the Vipassana meditation was certainly an amazing jumping off point, very dive headfirst in the deep end, not everyone can find the time or gumption or desire to do this. But the 12-hour walk is actually born somewhat from this idea, also from me walking across Antarctica solo, but with the same idea in mind, which is it is so powerful to do something that jolts your mind in a way that you haven't. Again, look, I'm not vilifying social media or technology or things like that, but it is good to take a break from that and dive into your own internal sort of dialogue. And for me, the 12-hour walk, the idea for this book was actually born out of COVID when I'm in a really depressed, bad headspace. I've come back from Antarctica. I've done Vipassana meditation. I found this deep flow inside my mind, body, and soul. And then COVID happens. I'm locked in my house, just like we all were, doom scrolling the news, getting bad news every single day, fear, all the things I thought I was doing were canceled. When I know a lot of people had that same experience, billions of people around the world. And I get into this really negative headspace in my mind. Like, I'm just like, well, what am I doing? I remember my wife was saying to me, like, Colin, you haven't changed out of your pajamas in 3 days. Like, get it together a little bit. Right. She was like, when was the last time you felt deeply in flow? And I said, I know this sounds crazy, but actually walking across Antarctica in silence and stillness, I found a lot of inner peace, as well as during this Vipassana meditation that I've done several times. And so I said to her, I was like, this might sound ridiculous, but since I was walking across Antarctica 12 hours per day, I'm at the Oregon coast. And I say to her, well, tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk out the door. Don't worry about me. I'm not going to be back for 12 hours. I'm going for a 12-hour walk. And she's like, Jenna, because she's seen me do all sorts of ridiculous things. She's like, okay, like have fun, whatever. I won't worry about you. And so I walk out my front door. I'm on the Oregon coast where Jenna and I were during COVID. And my phone buzzed in my pocket about 20 minutes in. And I instinctively grab for it to like see who's texting me or whatever. And before I look at the text, I'm like, wait a second, like, what am I doing? Like, I've been on my phone constantly. I've been staring at social media, doom scroll on the news, whatever. Like, I don't need my phone. I'm out here. Like, this is supposed to be me time. So I put my phone in airplane mode and I walk in stillness and silence for 12 hours. And again, when I come back through that front door, Jenna says the same thing she said to me after the meditation, the same thing she said to me after Antarctica. She was like, oh, like you're back. You're back. She could just see it in my face. And so I thought to myself, well, this was really powerful to take a day alone in my thoughts and move my body and walk. But maybe since like I've already walked so far or spent so much time in silence, this is just like some overly ambitious idea that like makes sense for me. But I had all sorts of other friends and family, as we all did, struggling during COVID with their own mindset, their own mental health, their sadness, the way that I had just been feeling. I had a lot of empathy for that. And so when I would talk to friends on the phone, they'd be like, yo, if I'm being honest, man, like I'm not doing well. And I would say to them, this might sound ridiculous, but I just did this 12-hour walk. Why don't you try it? And so before I knew it, a series of people in my life, friends, family, young, old, like different walks of life. Like I said, my 77-year-old mother-in-law, like people started taking this 12-hour walk. And no matter where they were coming from, if they were super fit or not fit at all, or had exercised a ton, or hadn't exercised a ton, or had meditated a lot, or had never meditated, like I said, all different spectrum, every single person that committed to doing this 12-hour walk came back with a deep, renewed sense of fulfillment, joy, unlocking something inside of them that they haven't felt in a long time, if ever, purpose, fulfillment, etc. And so I thought to myself, and hence why we're sitting here talking about, a book that I now have and a whole global movement that I'm hoping to start called the 12-Hour Walk was born from this, was born from saying, we always want to like buy the expensive thing or dream of the extravagant trip or the this or the that we want to do. And I'm not saying don't do those things if that's, what you're excited about doing. But the answer I have found to some of this, to unlocking this awareness, this fulfillment, is something that is free to all of us, is accessible to all of us. It just requires saying, you know what, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to put the 12-hour walk. I'm going to go take a look at myself, my interior dialogue in the mirror. And those limiting beliefs will come up. They will implicitly come up. But by doing this and working through this, you end up with more of a possible mindset on the other side. And I'll conclude by saying, the 12-hour walk itself, the mission of it, the adventure of it starts right now in this moment. And what I mean by that is you're listening to this podcast and I'm suggesting you this 12-hour walk. It's probably the first time you're hearing about this. Hopefully you read the book, etc. But you're hearing about this on this podcast right now. And maybe there's 1% of you who are listening that who go like, I'm doing this. I'm signed up. I have no doubts about it. I'm doing it tomorrow. Great. I'm like, amazing. Welcome to the community. I love it. And then there's some percentage of people that's like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is literally the worst idea I've ever heard. I'm never going to do it. There's no way I'm going to walk alone in silence. My guess is most people fall somewhere in between those two things. Maybe a little bit curious, but also kind of like, I don't know, 12 hours. That sounds like a long time to be alone and no music and what I don't know. Some level of limiting belief is likely popping up in your head right now. I don't have enough time for that. That's not going to work. Whatever that is. What's interesting is that why I say the experience starts right now, is that just by listening to this podcast, just by being seated with this idea, I am actually holding up a mirror to you, to your own interior dialogue. Whatever limiting beliefs, and it's different for different people, but whatever limiting beliefs are potentially popping up around the 12-hour walk, what I've also found for people is those are the same limiting beliefs that are on some level of a constant loop in your mind, meaning these limiting beliefs are likely holding you back in other ways of your life. You're not just assigning it to this. This is just a stand-in for other opportunities that you're facing, other interesting invitations or curiosities or risks or things outside of your comfort zone. So the 12-hour walk, what happens is you have maybe some limiting beliefs right now, but you say, you know what? I like this idea. I'm going to commit to this idea. I'm actually going to go and do this. And what happens on the other side of the 12-hour walk, and the next time after the walk, similar limiting belief pops up, you go, oh, I remember when that belief came up last time. I listened to it, I observed it, but it wasn't a truth, It wasn't a limiting truth. It was a belief. And my mind, goes through a negative cycle, just like all of our minds do, because we're all human. But I was able to push that aside. And what happens is that limiting belief voice gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And that possible belief mantra gets louder and louder and louder. And soon the balance tips more towards that. And the 12-hour walk is really just an exercise of flexing and developing the most important muscle we all have, that 6 stitches between our ears, our minds.
I absolutely love how you put that, because one of the things as I reflected finishing the book was that is your gym. The 12-hour walk is in fact your mind gym. And the problem is, just like working out in the gym physically, if people keep coming up to you and talking and you're between reps and you can't focus and you can't really engage, are you really getting the maximum workout? Where you're asking people to go for 12 hours uninterrupted, which in most people's lives no longer is like that. And that's why, Colin, you have something really special. It makes me smile because I think of Forrest Gump. The first time I watched Forrest Gump, I'm like, I'm getting running shoes. I'm getting out there. I'm going to go do that. And this is today's version of us, recognizing through all the hardship that many of us been through, that one more step, that a setback can be a setup for that comeback, that if you allow your mind a quiet place, and congratulations for you for finding that type of meditation. And I hope that our listeners too will find a place where they can allow their mind to rest, a place like a walk for 12 hours to help them be their very best. Colin, I want to thank you. You've been an outstanding inspiration for the world, and 10 million people need to get their running shoes on or their slippers, because like you said, you don't care if it takes you an hour to walk around the block or 12 hours to walk around the block, walk around the block. And that's Absolutely. What we need to do. So Colin, a great thank you to have you on our show today and be able to share the good, the bad, and the ugly in some of our adjusted realities that we all go through on a daily basis, and trying to really pack those limiting and unfortunate mindsets, talking points to ourselves, and just blow them away until it's unlimitless, that the sky or the stars are the limit, and we just keep pushing through it. So thank you, Colin, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to all the chiropractors out there. So much incredible work that you've done. My life has been exponentially better, and I wouldn't have been able to achieve these feats without an incredible team behind me, not least of which is my longtime chiropractor, Steve Kingston in Portland, Oregon, who's been working on me since I was in early teenage years. So grateful for all the support of amazing people like yourselves out there. So keep doing and shining your light brightly. And I hope you join the 12-hour walk community. Go to 12hourwalk.com, sign up, pick a date, read the book. And I can't wait to have you be one of 10 million as we spread this global movement of 12-hour walking and the mindset that we can all cultivate and conjure throughout it.
Truly fantastic. Thank you, Colin. Thank you for tuning into Adjusted Reality as we spoke to world explorer and best-selling author Colin O'Brady about his latest book and global movement, The 12-Hour Walk. Invest one day, conquer your mind, and unlock your best life. What is in fact causing your limiting thinking? Are you embracing opportunities to grow? Well, it may be time to get out there with your thoughts, alone, unaccompanied, and unattached, and see where your mindset takes you. This podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. As a special gift for listening today, visit f4cp.org/health, and you can get a copy of our Mind, Body, Spirit ebook, which focuses on many ways to optimize your health and the ones you love without the use of drugs or surgery. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with family and friends, rate, hopefully a 5-star, and review. I appreciate all of you, and I'm looking forward to having you come back again and listen to another podcast with me. If you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a doctor of chiropractic near you, visit f4cp.org find a doctor. We appreciate your support and look forward to checking in again with you soon.